Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, MJ from the Coaches Panel. Nice to be touching base with you, getting real close to the first parts of the partial lockout. So, myself and Kane, we thought we'd quickly jump on, have a quick chat about, Kane, some of the burning issues that fantasy coaches across all formats have to deal with. And I think there could be some really unlucky coaches that as they entered out of last round and entering into the new one, they find themselves with 3 forced trades potentially. In AFL Fantasy, we've got 3 trades available for you this week, and it's the last time you've got it too, by the way. It might not be as catastrophic as the other formats, but the other formats, you've got 2 trades a week. The 3 players that we're all talking about are Fyfe, Stewart, and then Jeremy Howe. You pretty much have to suggest that for the most part, Fyfe's probably the least important, although we'll get to the trading component of him in a second, but all 3 pretty much, it's going to be hard to say you're going to have to look to move them on for the most part. Each team I know is unique. But as we think about, before we get to the like-for-like trades, though, of who to look at, there are some mistakes in the thought processes that unfortunately as coaches, we're starting to fall into some traps right across all formats of the game as we look to move these injured premiums out.
MJ, the other one I'll add just before we get into those 3 is Sam Naismith is also a really popular guy.
True.
And as we know, the risk with the price that Naismith is there's very limited options like for like.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother conundrum that we'll have to deal with later in this podcast. But yeah, something that's caught my eye, MJ, that I just can never really get my head around is you mentioned 3 elite premiums there. 2 in the back line, 1 in the midfield, all of which across all formats should be top 6 defenders or top 8 midfielders.
Yeah.
You know, they're that upper echelon. These aren't guys that are on the fringes. These are guys that clearly you picked with that intention to hold them for the year. And again, if most coaches probably have 1, a lot of coaches still have 2. And if you've got all 3, then that's just the way fantasy goes.
Brutal.
But what I'm seeing people talk about this week a lot is, especially people that have, 2 of those 3, is I'm going to go down to a rookie and then go to another premium. And I think if you've got 2 premiums, I don't want to have 400K lying in my bank.
No way.
When I need the points, because as we've seen in this season, for instance, if you traded, let's just use an example of Jeremy Howe down to a Stephen Hill, very popular rookie, especially in SuperCoach.
Yeah.
And maybe, Nat Fyfe, let's just say, I don't recommend this, but I've seen people do it. You want to take Fyfe to Neil. And that's sort of part of your theory. So we've got Jeremy Howe and Nat Fyfe. We've gone to Stephen Hill and Lachie Neale.
Yeah.
Probably going to leave you anywhere between, again, Jeremy Howe down to Stephen Hill, MJ, is netting you nearly 350 grand. So let's say you've got 250 grand sitting in the bank. I just think about 250 grand and you've just gone from 1 primo. You had 2 primos to start this round. Now you're down to 1 and a rookie.
Yuck.
Think about this. If we get injuries next week, you're not going to be able to redistribute this cash onto your field. So when I see that, I just want people to go, I had 2 primos, let's go 2 primos.
Go get 2 primos.
And I think the reason people want to get the rookie, MJ, is they don't want to miss that 50K price rise. If I miss that 50K price rise by Stephen Hill, I'm not generating cash. But this is where I find the logic falls apart. If you do a trade like that and you take Stephen Hill,
sure,
because you wanted Marcus Bontempelli next week or Paddy Dangerfield next week, they're likely to go up a similar level of Stephen Hill if they have a good week.
Yeah.
So next week, when you try to bring in a Dangerfield or a Bontempelli, they've also increased, maybe not 50, maybe 25, 30K.
Yeah.
So you're 20K short. But I'm pretty confident Dangerfield and Bontempelli are going to outscore a Stephen Hill.
Oh, yeah.
There's 50 points. And let's say you've lost 50 points this week. And then next week, the way things are going on the injury front, MJ, you've got another defender or another midfielder or another forward premium out. All of a sudden, you're another week down with a full primo. So now that 50 points you cost first week has rolled into the next week because you don't have enough trades, to get those points back onto the field. So I would just encourage people. I know it looks like there might not be many rookies on the horizon, but they will keep coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially with all the situations we're dealing with in the AFL world of hubs and all these things that haven't come to light exactly how they're going to play out. There will be rookies on the way. I know at the moment, Stephen Hill looks like a guy that you can't miss, or a Caleb Sarong looks like a guy you can't miss. And I think in their team, they've both got great job security.
Absolutely.
You can look at Stephen Hill's performance one or two ways. He scored all his points in the first quarter. If he gets, clearly it's his first game for a long while. There's no reason to think that he won't be better for the run. And maybe he can be an 85 type of guy, and that's great. But I would just encourage you, if you've got two premiums, especially in a shortened season where points have never been more valuable.
Yeah.
And to be fair, we actually do have a lot of rookies. I'm looking at a lot of teams rolling with Starcevic, great rookie. Brander's done a job.
Yeah.
Even guys like McInerney, Buderick,
Rivers.
guys, Curtis Taylor. Like, there actually is enough cash generation going around. We've already heard Mitch Hibbard's going to debut for the Bombers this week.
Yep.
There will be guys, as teams deal with all the implications of COVID, there will be rookies that come through. I just encourage people, do not sacrifice points on the field because you don't know what's going to come in the future. And as I said, if you've gone from 2 primos to 1 because you think you'll get the primo the next week, who knows what will happen the next week? You could be dealing with even more issues next week than you are this week. So I would just encourage people, find a replacement because you think they're going to be a great scorer. Don't worry about the 30, 40, 50, even 60K that one of these rookies may make. Because there will be another rookie that comes through. And I'm looking at a lot of teams and I'm thinking, cash generation isn't your problem.
No.
The problem's going to be picking players that you actually think are top of their line. Because when I look at some of the guys, MJ, that are top of their lines currently, there's a lot of guys we wouldn't have expected to right up there.
You look through that back line, and it's probably the line of all formats that I have the least confidence in being able to pick a like-for-like replacement. And that's where it's dangerous for coaches, especially in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. A little less concern for me in SuperCoach, but definitely in those two formats, I've got huge concerns what I'm seeing coaches do as a strategy and who they should actually go out and get. Because look, Sam Doherty across the formats it is clearly, if he stays fit, I don't see anybody getting anywhere near him as at the top scoring player at this current stage. And if he's not the top, he's going to be in the top handful. Basher Hooley looks like he's going to continue to be a great scoring candidate for us. Should he stay fit, he's going to be there and there around the mark. Then you've got a few weird averages that are in there, like a Sard and a Ridley. Look, they do give you value for money. Can you trust that in SuperCoach only? I'm not as sold on that. I think Caleb Daniel's probably the better one of those SuperCoach options. And then you throw in a Braden Maynard, who's really had a 30 to 40 point increase. So it's an incredibly volatile, hard to predict line to pick premiums.
Yeah, and there's one other thing, MJ, I do want to comment on that I've seen a lot of people talking about this week, and it is a great resource. I love the dollars per points.
Yeah.
The only thing I will say with dollars per points is it is based on the points they have already scored.
Correct.
Those points are behind you.
Gone.
And obviously the point as well is the value is going to go up. So again, Jordan Ridley, I think MJ is one of the most fascinating players that we have to deal with this week, especially in SuperCoach.
Yeah.
Because clearly in a shortened season, you want to get as many premium players as you can in as soon as possible. And the advantage of where Ridley is at the moment is he's anywhere between 100 to 150K cheaper than these so-called premium range, which I'm calling, Jake Lloyd, the upper echelon at just shy of 600.
Yeah.
And then you're dealing with, the 540 Caleb Daniel all the way down to about 520 Sicily range.
Yeah, that's right.
And we know that if you've got 100K in the bank.
Yeah.
Sorry, MJ, you go ahead.
No. Yeah. No, and if you want to look at him, he's gone up 55K, got a break even of 9 in SuperCoach, 410,000 if you haven't considered him. And this year from his 3 games, been pretty decent with terms of his scoring too. A couple of hundreds, 100 in round 1 and 94 in round 2. And then last week, the 134 against Carlton. That's what's really put him on people's radar.
Yeah. And the advantage with these type of players is, and we've seen it with Simpkin, if you get on at the right time,
correct,
you are saving yourself 150K while getting points on the field. Against Jai Simpkin, people got him at 380K.
Yeah.
People are still buying him this week. And I'm not trying to talk people out of Jai Simpkin.
No.
It's just that when I look at Jai Simpkin at 520, MJ, and I'm just going to put this out there on the top. I got Jai Simpkin at 520, as good as he's been. For 40K more, I can go to Patrick Dangerfield.
Yeah.
50K more, I can get Bontempelli. And I think the appeal with that for Simpkin was the price tag.
Yeah.
What he was delivering, the role he's got at that price was fantastic. The advantage with SuperCoach is that Jordan Ridley, he's only played 3 games. So his price has only had 2 movements and he's 410. Do I expect him to go 109? No, I don't. But at 410, if you think he's a 90 guy in this condensed season, that's taken a rookie off your field who might be giving you 50.
Yeah.
And you put in a guy that's close enough. Clearly, the hard thing I always find is there's still, I know we're 4 rounds in, there's still 13 weeks where you could be stuck with Ridley at a 90.
Yeah.
And again, we haven't seen how the dust has settled yet, but there's a lot of guys that I think are capable of 100 in this condensed SuperCoach format. So if you take Sicily this week, MJ, let's just say you take Sicily and you get a 90 guy on the field instead of a 50. So you've gained 40 points. But maybe if you waited that week, you can get a Sicily the next week who goes 10 points more.
Yeah.
So over those next 12 rounds, you've got 120 up minus the 50 that, so you're probably 70 points ahead. Conversely, if someone picks Ridley this week and he hits, you have a massive advantage because a lot of people are going to take the Caleb Daniels, the Sicilies, and you've got another 110, 120K up your sleeve to be that upgrade ahead. And I think that's where a lot of coaches, and again, I've looked at it as well, and it's probably not for me with the way my team personally set up.
Yep.
But I can see why people go, he's Ridley, even if he gets close enough to the top 6 backs, gives me that extra bit of cash to be one premium ahead. The flip side, MJ, as we know, is we've seen 3 games. And of those 3 games, the Bombers have won 2, and they had a very close loss to Carlton, where Ridley used the ball almost perfectly. He had a sensational game, and rightfully so, he scored 134. The thing I worry about is clearly he's still a young player in his career, and 410 is a super awkward price range. I've heard people talking about his break even. To be honest, MJ, at that price range, I couldn't care less about his break even.
Nah, it doesn't matter.
I don't care if he goes up, it's just proving my point to keep him.
Correct.
If he goes down, it's not worth the trade out. So I don't see any scenario, barring him getting injured long term, you should even be considering trading Jordan Ridley out. So when people say, oh, he's got a break even in the, let me actually check for it to get it exact. He's got a break even of 9. It doesn't matter at that price. It just doesn't matter. So I want people to think, don't worry about his price. What do you think from now on Jordan Ridley is?
Yeah.
Are you getting a bargain that you're going to lock away for 100K cheaper and get the same output? Or do you think, you know what, I'd rather just wait a week and maybe there's another player that's proven that's a bit closer. So I feel like Ridley, there's going to be a lot of coaches that go either way in 2 weeks. They're going to be ecstatic. They've got, maybe a Jai Simpkin price. Everyone gets on in a week or 2. Or I feel like this could absolutely blow up massively.
Yeah, look, the only format that's probably a strategy to monitor the break evens is AFL Fantasy, where you've got the 2 trades a week every single week, and you're always kind of looking for creative ways to almost do a 2-in-1 for the most part, where you're always looking to increase the value of your overall squad while trying to get points on field, rather than having to do the full old school traditional style of upgrade, downgrade, wait 3 or 4 weeks, upgrade, downgrade, wait a couple of weeks. So in that format, it's a little bit more, but even then, I think with Ridley, I think that's the right approach. If you're getting him, it's for the longer term approach of, I think he's going to be a comparable scorer and give me those points.
Yeah, that's the thing, MJ. And it's not super tempting when you see that he's playing Collingwood on Friday night. Like you don't walk into that matchup thinking this is a nice way to get, my Jordan Ridley ownership started with. Collingwood's one of the best teams at possessing and dominating the SuperCoach points. But hey, it's the exact type of price range where you can really make big leaps.
Yes.
Because like Simpkin was 2 weeks ago, you got him, if you got him 2 weeks ago, anywhere between 100 to 150K cheaper than the masses that are getting him on now. And we haven't even talked about the output he's given you. So the price range and the output is really tempting by Ridley.
Yeah.
But I feel like when you're moving on the likes of a Howe, a Stewart, and a Fife, like I mentioned at the top of the show, clear top liners in their line.
Yeah.
I'd want to recoup that. And if I miss on Ridley, I don't think he's the type of player that's really going to burn me on the back end. I think he's had a sensational start and he's gone at 109.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be that guy for the rest of the year. Full credit to him and the coaches that pick him. But I feel like when you're dealing with top liners, I want to bring top liners straight back in.
Yeah, well, I'm seeing, this trend of coaches, even in AFL fantasy, where you are doing a little bit more of that continual improvement all along the way of going, I've got the Jeremy Howe, I'm going to go and get another guy like a Hayden Young. I'm going to go make more money. Well, hang on a sec. Howe's has done his job. He's increased 100K across all formats. Why did you get him? Ultimately, you believed he was going to step you up to be able to become a premium pretty quickly, or was going to be the Ridleys and the Simpkin types of that undervalued, underpriced player that I was going to be able to have there. You've now got the injury, you've got that cash in the bank. Go and move him over to that big line premium that you believe, not from what they've just done, but what they're going to do, will be that top-end player.
Yeah, the only reason I think, MJ, that coaches would be looking at doing a Howe down, and like we've always said with things, you have to take into fact what you're doing with the other trade.
Yeah, correct.
Sam Naismith is a player where a Howe down makes sense because it can get you out of a hole. It's just a restructure. Like we know, especially in SuperCoach, Goldie, Grundy, gone.
Yeah.
And then Pitnet's doing a sensational job providing points and dollars at the same time.
Yeah.
In terms of Pitnet, we're talking, he's already gone up 162K. So he's just under 400K. The Gorns of the world are 708, depending on the budget, what you can do with a Howe, because even Howe's still, 150 under that. So you have to have something in the bank, but that makes sense to me. I understand a restructure. If you're stuck with a Naismith, especially if he's your R2, you're going to have to restructure. You might have to use that Howe money to get a Naismith to a Pitnet, especially if you can't afford one of those big boys. So that totally makes sense.
Absolutely.
As I said, MJ, it's when I see moves that aren't putting points back on the field. I just really worry because I know with what this season's throwing up, again, still, who would have thought that Steel Sidebone would have a 4-game suspension?
Yeah.
There's stuff like this where I just really want people to be putting that points while you can back onto the field.
Yeah.
Just put it back on there. True. Yeah. And I think the other thing that jumps out, MJ, is people don't have a lot of confidence in the backs. And I think that's where we found that DPP this year is super important. And I agree. I think if you've got a Howe in defense and you have the ability to bring in a forward or a mid, looking at the scores and the value,
take it.
I'm doing that every day of the week because, again, I look at a guy like Jake Lloyd, who a lot of people are thinking about it. Let's just do SuperCoach, 589K. If I said to you, MJ, who averages more from now to the end of the year, Jake Lloyd or Patrick Dangerfield, you'd probably go Dangerfield.
Yep.
And then I'd tell you that you're going to save 30K doing it.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, the way things have fallen, a lot of people have more confidence in their defender rookies than they do in the mids. Yeah. So you might be bringing on a Starcevic, a Brander onto the field, and maybe you're taking off a Tyler Brown. So not only do I think that Dangerfield goes more than Lloyd in that format, I might also be getting another 5 to 10 points in the rookies. So again, I'm sure there'll be some coaches that don't have that flexibility. They might already have a Brander in the defense and they actually have to bring in a premium defender. I get that.
Yep.
And I think it's a really hard decision. If I had the luxury of bringing in a forward or a mid,
I'd take it too.
That's where I'd be looking. Because when I see a Patrick Dangerfield at 560, drop 66K, and coaches that don't have him are very lucky because he was on track for easily a 160 till Michael Hibbard ran absolutely straight through him in that fourth quarter. And that's when the game was on the line. Patrick Dangerfield, if he had done anything in that time when the points were still there to be won, we're looking at a 170 and he's probably up closer to 580K. So he jumps out to me. Obviously, Marcus Bontempelli, like you mentioned the other week, MJ, he's through that Matt DeBoer tag. He's through, the Collingwood matchup, which we know dominates points. And obviously he was sensational against the Swans. He really set the game up. I know he was on 112 at halftime. And again, you say faded. He still had a 50-point second half and reeled out a 166. So I think he's another one. When I'm looking at Bontempelli versus Lloyd, I'm going Bontempelli every day of the week because the way SuperCoach scoring seems to be working this year, we know rucks, and you wrote a beautiful article talking about that, MJ, is that these guys just seem to be getting the lion's share. Todd Goldstein's the number one clearance player in the AFL, MJ, nearly 9 clearances a game. So when you've got a shortened game and he's delivering that, there is going to be a huge amount of waiting. So give me the midfielder every day at this stage. I just want a few more weeks to see how the dust settles in defense because 4 games is it's so tough to work out what's going on there,
Yeah, and even, to talk about AFL Fantasy or Dream Team, what our top line defenders are doing in those formats, it's really not worth the dollars it's going to cost to get those big name players. Different in SuperCoach, where it's the same amount of points per game available and they're spreading it across. But just as an illustration point right now, if we were to look through AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, there is currently only 4 defenders that have an average over 80 in that format. And now one of them is out for the majority of the year. Just 4. If we were to look at total points for an illustration, in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, a lot of coaches really frustrated by a Dan Houston's year. And understandably so. He hasn't been the 90 midfield, not getting the centre bounces. SuperCoach, this is a different conversation because I do think you need to absolutely move him on quickly. He's not making money. He's not getting points. Move him on. But in AFL Fantasy, right now, 390 points is the highest total point scorer in Sam Doherty. Jake Lloyd is in at number 4 with 314. Dan Houston's at 282. He's got 25 less points than Jake Lloyd. But in AFL Fantasy, if you were to upgrade Lloyd from Houston, that's going to set you back around about 150K for a total so far. Now, I know it's only points so far, and there's only been a handful of hundreds that we've got in the back line. But for only 25 points total improvement, 150K? Like, people are overpaying big time because in AFL Fantasy, all formats are the same, but definitely in AFL Fantasy, everyone's break-even is pretty much achievable almost every single week. Like, when you look at what people's break-evens are, you're like, oh yeah, you could pretty much, that's attainable. Like, the highest break-even at the moment in that format is Nick Newman with a 109. He's not playing. Zorko's 97. The most non-injury impacted player would be a Cornelio at an 86. Don't tell me that Stephen Cornelio's not capable of hitting an 86 in a shortened game, and at 7-12, people are going, I've got to get rid of Cornelio. He's going to drop so much cash. 86? So what? Even if just this week he goes and scores you a 70-odd, he's dropping 10K? We're just starting to use old school style of thinking of, I've got to go and get the big dogs, and you still need to. But 150K jump to upgrade a Houston to a Lloyd. Now, I know that's points that have gone, but only 4 defenders are averaging over 80 in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. Is it worth moving on the Bailey Williams, the Dan Houstons, the John Nobles? I don't know if that's the urgent priority when you could be getting these mid-cows of a McInerney and a Brown and a Max King off your field. That's where I'd be investing my upgrades because you're getting those big points.
Yeah, I think AFL Fantasy, that's the great thing almost about it now, is that it is such a different game to Dream Team and SuperCoach. It has to be treated as such. And it always feels to me that the people that do the best in it, they're making, you'd call them sideways moves in any other format, but it might be, for example, let's just use Stephen Cornelio MJ.
Sure.
You bring in Stephen Cornelio and you drop him down. Let's just say a Darcy Parish, who if he got a midfield role, all of a sudden he's a great scorer and you're almost saving 170 grand. Like, it's those people that go out on a limb, predict the player that's underpriced,
correct,
make the cash with similar output coming back the other way, and they just do that week after week.
Yeah.
Because you really have to be on the front foot. Again, we've got price movements after 1 week. You've really got to, maybe it's an injury to a player. Let's just say, for instance, that the Merritt injury was long-term. And you look and you think, geez, Darcy Parish is 540K, which in AFL Fantasy is an absolute bargain. And we know what he did in that Sydney game. The last quarter, he had 13 touches and one of the most important players to get them over the line. It's moves like that you really have to be on the forefront. And like I said in SuperCoach, there's so many rookies that everyone has that still have dollars to create.
Yeah.
You don't really feel like you have to move on, a Buderick, a Brander. Like, maybe if they got dropped, but at the same time, they might be back in the team the next week. So I feel like the coaches that make those moves where it's a premium player, but they see someone that's going to score similarly for 100K, that's how they get the cash. And again, it is risky, but it is the format where you have to take those chances because you're not going to get the big price movements like you are in other formats. Again, Stephen Cornelio, as you mentioned, that's a very attainable break even for a player of his caliber. Yeah. Very attainable. Very, very attainable. And that's why we cautioned trading Whitfield last week.
Yeah.
Because now all of a sudden you've wasted one of your trades to bring some, and you want to get Whitfield straight back in. So I feel like that's the output. You've got to identify those players. I know Brennan Parfitt's one MJ that a lot of people like what he's shown in his game so far this year. He's been a tackling machine. He's 600K. You know, maybe you slide a Canelio down to him, pocket yourself 100K. I think that's the thing. That's the trick with AFL Fantasy is you've got to identify, and sometimes you've got to trade premium players. That's the whole frame of mind we're not used to in SuperCoach or DreamTeam. You know, you would hold your premiums and make them the total last priority.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, the SuperCoach, the way AFL Fantasy prices move, they're so slow
to go down
at first. It's very hard for them to drop. So you've almost, as I said, you've got to be finding that value. Again, Michael Gibbons, if people knew that 2 or 3 weeks ago, he would have been an incredible pickup. He's appreciating, but it's points at the same time.
Yeah.
It's almost like what we mentioned with Ridley. If Ridley was in AFL Fantasy, that is more appealing. The hard thing is you have to be on it so quick because the prices move after 1 week.
Yeah.
You know, by the time you almost get to these guys, like Bailey Smith last week, you're almost getting them at their top price. You know, you've missed those good scores. So I would really just encourage people to be creative. Look at those team sheets. You know, maybe it's a Collingwood with a side bottom out or a Howe long-term out. Maybe you've got to take a punt on a Darcy Moore, you know, who hasn't averaged great so far, but maybe you think, hey, maybe with Howe he gets a few more of those switches. You know, I feel like that's the creative thinking.
Yeah.
In AFL Fantasy specifically.
Yeah.
You've really got to be looking at value. And is there a player that can go close enough to my guy?
Yeah.
There's 100K cheaper and bank cash that way because you just can't sit on your hands and let these rookies slowly appreciate. Because we've got situations now, MJ, where, I mean, I love what Caleb Sarong did. And I think with 5 out, he's got a great opportunity to keep scoring. But you're looking at a trade for him in AFL Fantasy. You're getting anywhere between 20 to 50K down. Yeah. And a lot of players, you have to spend money to get him in because he's at that premium price range because he was a gun kid and he's already played 1 game. So that's why it's a great format. I love that it challenges you to think differently. You know, if you see a rookie come in, you've always got to almost take them before they've played a game, which we know in other formats has inherent risk. But at the same time, it has such a great reward. So I'm actually really enjoying that AFL Fantasy is just a totally different game to what we've grown up, you know, playing in DreamTeam and SuperCoach. And you have to change that thinking and pick guys that wouldn't be relevant in a SuperCoach because you've only got the limited trades. So I just really encourage people to do your own research. And if you see a player that you think he's scoring so well and he's cheaper than my guy, that's the creative way to keep points up on your team while also generating cash.
Well, you look at it and you think people in that format, around about 37% of the comp in AFL Fantasy own Lachie Neale. He's priced right now at $901,000. He's had an incredible start to the year and his price has gone up around about 124K. Awesome if you've been on him. Well done to you. We talked about it a little bit last week. About 180K cheaper is Patrick Dangerfield. And again, we've used him as a couple of times as an illustration through there. 300,000 cheaper. They're not like for like, but a Brandon Parfitt is 300,000 cheaper than him rolling through there. Even a Jack Steele's 150K cheaper. Mitch Duncan's 130,000 cheaper. Travis Boak's 120,000 cheaper. So's Clayton Oliver. If you want to go unique, if you think the merit out for the suspension, it will give a McGrath a bump for a week or so. He's at 663K. Like that amount of money, because it's not just, as you said right at the top of the episode, it's not just the like for like points for points replacement. It's the what do you do with that additional cash? Because I think if you're making that downgrade maneuver like the Howe to a Ridley, it's got to be to restructure it elsewhere. It can never just be, I'm going to pocket that cash for a rainy day or for another week, because 1 or 2 more injuries and it just stunts the development and the improvement of your side. So I think if you're doing that slight cash grab trade in any of the formats, make that cash active. Don't just have 200, 300, 400,000 sitting on the bench week to week to week, because eventually you're not actually improving your side. And while cash generation in the early part of the season is key, if you're not letting that cash generating impact your on-field scoring, then it doesn't matter how much cash you've made if you're not turning it into points on field.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, MJ. The winner of these competitions are not judged on cash generation.
No.
They're judged on total points. So you've always got to have that front of mind for me. That's how I try to think about it, and I totally agree. Again, unfortunately, for the coaches that don't have him, Lachie Neale is getting to a range where I already think it is unattainable. And I look at the sides that he's played, and if you look at the disposal differentials, they're some of the easiest teams. They give up the most possessions.
Yeah.
They've just come from 3 consecutive weeks at home.
Yeah.
We know that we're probably going to get thrown into these hub situations. And as I mentioned, if you want to climb rank, you take a Neale, you're just banking that loss.
Correct.
That's just one other
No
player that you
advantage.
don't have to differentiate yourself. The players that move, you want to be on that player. And again, a guy that just straight jumps out to me, MJ, especially in AFL fantasy, an Elliot Yeo.
Yeah.
Like, I look at how many free kicks he's given away. And I know a lot of them are from tackles too. So you talk about a couple of those going his way.
Yeah.
We're talking, 6-7 point swings just right off the top. I think they're going to go back to WA and play,
7
multiple
games, I think it is in a row.
They
there.
could play. So I think if I'm saving 200K on a Yo, like, you've got to find that player. Again, we mentioned it last week. If you're up at the top, I understand
Different
you
story.
going defensive and trying to neutralize Lachie Neale. I actually do get that logic.
Sure.
Take away that advantage that maybe the coaches alongside you have.
But if you're
But
chasing,
if you want to climb, if you're chasing and you want to climb rank, you're going to have to take a chance, because you wouldn't get an Elliot Yeo at sub 700K if he started the season well.
nope.
But you've got to bank on, and we mentioned it last week with Dangerfield. I said Dangerfield's disposal efficiency has been 10% lower than his career average for a 10-year period.
Mm.
What happened last week? He
Sort
went
of
at
that.
75%,
140
came back up.
SuperCoach. Yeah.
and he got a 140 in SuperCoach. These things do balance out. Tim Kelly, for example, in SuperCoach, he's leading the league in turnovers. If anyone's watched Tim Kelly the last 2 years, that is not the way he plays. He's a very good ball user. He makes great decisions. West Coast are also one of the worst scoring teams in the season. Again, SuperCoach, never been more important for your team to be winning.
Yeah.
Never been more important to be involved in those scoring chains.
Yeah.
So all these sort of factors, we always preach it, but you've got to be predicting what is to come. Anyone can look at what's already happened and think, yep, that's going to continue because of such and such reasons. But the coaches that make big jumps, they get on the player before they've had their run.
Yeah.
And and it can be really scary. And sometimes you just have to say, and the numbers might not suggest it's going to happen next week. When you see it, you see that big picture like we pointed out with Dangerfield, where his disposals between 62 and 67% for 10 years. If it's at 40 now, well, there's going to be a few games where he's above that to get it back up. You just got to sometimes bank that. Last week, it was a 3-game sample size. Now we have 4 weeks.
Yeah.
In the scheme of the season, and we read it out last week, guys that started the season slowly, that finished in the top. Guys that started the season red hot and were nowhere to be seen. You were buying them at top dollar.
Yeah.
I just would encourage people to be creative. And I know it's hard this year because the fixture, as we've seen this week, you just don't know. And I'm not even super confident. This is just my opinion. That everyone will play everyone once. It might come to a scenario where we have to change that. But I would just be backing in the player, especially if they're proven, that you think they just can't continue to go this bad. It just doesn't work like that. And on the flip side, as good as Lachie Neale's been, and everything worked in his advantage, he's playing only 10 minutes total game time less this year than he did last year. And we know the reduction in time. So it's no surprise that he's keeping up his stats and he's taking a bigger piece of the SuperCoach pie that's constant. But even still, he's got Port Adelaide this week.
Yeah,
he's got harder teams to come. So, as I said, if you want to catch up rank, you have to go out on a limb. You have to pick a player you think the good points are about to arrive, not ones that are already in the past.
Yeah, and buy them at their low point. Don't overspend on these guys that have really peaked in price. You're sacrificing your side. If you were to go and make that big trade up to a Neale, yep, you've missed it. That's fine. Cop it on the chin, as Kane has said. Go find that younger, not so much younger guy, but that cheaper guy, because that additional cash You could throw that onto another player. You could upgrade your Curtis Taylor right now. Maybe it's a week or two early, and that's fine. All of a sudden, go and get it. Basically bottomed out Lockie Whitfield. Get yourself that Tim Kelly or that Elliot Yeo type guy on top of them. And all of a sudden, even though you might not have him as a captaincy option, you should have others. Overall, your team will be stronger and your points should certainly level out. If not, get you marginally ahead.
Yeah, the other thing, MJ, I would advise people when they are trying to pick these players is look how the team's actually going. I'll use Josh Dunkley as an example last year, right? So Josh Dunkley has a forward role to start the year. Everyone picked him. He was a forward, but everyone had the assumption that he'd continue that midfield role that he had at the end of 2018.
Yeah.
Bulldogs started the season with 2 wins. Dunkley was okay. Mid-70s in Dream Team, mid-80s in SuperCoach. They lost the next 4 games, the Bulldogs. What do you think happened after that? Beveridge said, this mix is not working. He changed it up in round 7 against the Tigers. He threw Dunkley into the midfield. And they won that game. The next week, they beat Brisbane. So when I'm looking at this, that's why an Elliot Yeo or a guy that's in a team that's struggling and they're struggling as a result, is there going to be a shift in role?
Yeah.
Is there going to be something? And conversely, sometimes you have to be worried for players.
Totally.
If a guy's scoring really well in a bad team, sometimes they take that role off him. They'll move him out of that role.
Yeah.
So I would think if the team's struggling, especially if they're a good team, like I think the Eagles are,
Yeah.
again, clearly they've been really disappointing up in the harbour, the Gold Coast. But you got to think that, again, I know these coaches don't care about SuperCoach or Dream Team per se, but they care about winning.
Yeah.
And if the current mix they've got is not working,
I'll change it.
you will see them change things up. Even at St Kilda, they lost to Collingwood with the 2-pronged rucks.
Yep, they changed it.
Switched it up against Richmond.
They won.
Got the win.
Yeah.
So that's something I look to as well, is that, okay, why is this not working? Why is this not working for the player, for the team, and what potential role change could we see? And selection will tell you a lot about that. Selection will tell you. If you knew that Rowan Marshall would be rucking solo and you're a daily fantasy player, you'd be on him straight away,
Absolutely.
So you've got to look at those things. And as I said, Dunkley last year was a perfect example. The Bulldogs were poor. He had a horrible role. They switch things up. And especially if they get a result and the player plays well, that's when you're onto a winner.
I think selection's such a crucial thing to look at. As we know, someone like a Luke Bruce, for example, if we were to talk about a Hawthorn, he's out with a fractured jaw for the next few weeks. You might be looking at a Chad Wingard right now as a really tasty forward premium going, he's the guy I'm going to go get. Here's the thing. I think he's going to be around that marker. But if Hawthorn don't bring another small goal-kicking forward into that side, it's safe to presume that potentially Wingard might not get the midfield moments that he's been getting through the year. Now, of course, he may still, but you've got to look at what that selection might mean. Michael Gibbons is, pretty much a sideways trade in AFL fantasy, but has got a really nice break even. But if a Zach Fisher comes in this week, he could potentially take some of that midfield role. Now, yes, they're going to reward players who are getting midfield opportunities and a team's winning without doubt. But the selections do dictate what's going to happen. Adam Treloar's about to come in to that Collingwood side. What does that mean? Yes, side bottom's out, but Treloar and side bottom aren't like-for-like replacements. What does that mean for a Pendlebury? What does that mean for an Adams, who have been getting so much ball on the inside when they've got arguably their most dynamic midfielder coming into stoppage and clearance moments? That's what you've got to be looking at. It's not just the fixture. It's not just the price. It's then looking at those teams that are and what they're bringing in and doing, because that will give an element of seeing what coaches may or may not be thinking with structures.
Yeah, well, we saw John Longmire after the game. He obviously moved Callum Mills into the midfield to run with Marcus Bontempelli.
Yeah.
And Callum Mills was sensational. He had, 80 Dream Team, which we know this year is 100 in the old and 112 SuperCoach. The problem is, the conundrum he has is he said that Callum Mills is a sensational defender.
Yeah.
And I'm having a better time finding someone to play in the midfield than I am someone to play in defence. Again, if selection, you see him bring in players that are defenders and he says that, then maybe you have confidence that Mills will have that role long term. And those are the type of players. And we see it all the time. Dan Houston happened last year.
Yeah.
He got that shift into the midfield. He had a boost. These players will emerge.
Yes.
Again, we are only early into the season and it's obviously a crazy season and clubs are trying to work out everything that's going on.
Totally.
So I understand, it's hard. It's never been harder to predict. We've got different data. We've got different game times. Coaches are using different tactics. Again, Geelong, for instance, prior to last week, they weren't a kick mark team, but that matchup against Melbourne, they just decided it was best to kick mark, and they had 112 marks in a shortened game, which is
insane,
out of this world. Will that continue? Will the likes of, O'Connor, Guthrie, hard to tell. But sometimes you do have to take a chance on those changes and those little shifts, and as best you can, the fixture. I know the fixture is really hard for a lot of coaches, and it does have a big implication on scoring. We've seen what teams have done to Adelaide, MJ, poor your guys, to the Dockers. So I just would encourage people just to think outside the box, because I know it seems like these players will never bounce back, but I promise you, they're proven premiums for a reason. Will they scale the same heights as last year?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. But when you see players like a Patrick Dangerfield, sub 100, what he is, like, he's just not going to hang around there very long unless it's an injury. So
and especially when the role is the same and nothing's changed. Dane Zorko, who we know is out injured and is going to be, it was like, why is he dropping so drastically? Well, the role has changed. The reason someone's underperforming, there's always a layer towards it. And if coaches can identify it quickly and then jump on someone at a cheaper price point, which you could have done with a Bont a week ago before a Whitfield. Look, if DPP was being awarded, which it is in AFL Fantasy after this round, and he was just one position eligible, he'd be getting defensive stats because he spent so much time over those first 3 games as a defender. Last week, back up through the forward line, back up through the wing. And that's where he dominated the game until Maine went and had to play a negating role on him from quarter time because he was so damaging in and up and around the ball. And so you've got to look at the whys. Everything has a why. Who plays the Zorko role this week for Brisbane? Does a McCluggage spend a little bit less time on the ball and replay that? Because Camillus Yeoman's not the like-for-like replacement for a Dane Zorko, although he was in game. So who they bring in this week will give you an indication of what they're thinking of doing to replace that role. You're absolutely right.
MJ, you mentioned off the top, if someone had the 3 premiums of Stewart, Howe and Fife, and you said you'd be keeping Fife. Is that just because you think that clearly the other 2 have long-term injuries? You're just happy to put Fife on the pine. It's a mystery hamstring. He could be back next week. He could be back in 2 weeks. We know it's Nat Fife, and that when he's on the field, he scores really well, but you've never seen him play 22 games. Is there any reason you think someone would trade a Fife and a Howe, for instance, and leave a Tom Stewart on the pine?
The reason you do that is because you've got the bench depth to be able to do that, and the players you want to get in this week based on fixture or price point are ripe for this week and for the moves you need to make. And so that would be the reason you do that. You go, I've got the bench cover to be able to get away with. I've got a Starcevic and a Rivers, for example, on my bench. I can move Starcevic onto the field, or Brander onto the field, or a Duday onto the field. And I've got that. So that would be a reason for doing that, is you've got a stronger depth to be able to get you through there. Those cash cows have got a better fixture matchup that you could be able to do that. Absolutely. If I was a Fife owner and I am in SuperCoach, I'm still going to move him on. I've never heard of a 3-week hamstring. I've never heard of a 2-week one. 3 weeks, borderline. But definitely, 21 games, 21 days is generally a normal hammy. And so what's the priority order? Certainly the length of games missing is a reason, but then it's got to be about your squad and your unique needs. For me, I don't have those other 2, so I'd look to move him on when you've got a Bontempelli and a Danger. Like 3 games doesn't sound like a lot, but if you were to contrast to the amount of games left to go in the rest of the season, he's nearly missing a quarter of games for the rest of the year. And if I said to you, this guy's going to be only available for 3/4 of the rest of the year, would you hold a player if you had the luxury to move them on? Would you do that? Absolutely, you would look to do that move. And you'd make money out of that too, the Dangerfields and the Bontempellis and the Duncans. And so for me, could you hold a Fife if you had all 3 of them, or a Naismith? Yep, absolutely you could. But remembering, these players are going to be missing a minimum now of a quarter of games played. And so you've got to look at all those elements, which is going to dictate and determine what trades you make.
Yeah, the other thing I would say as well is if you can, always look to loophole. If we
Yeah.
know Fife's out, you're probably going to get a crack at looking at Tyler Brown on Friday.
Yeah.
McInerney's got an early Saturday game. Obviously, the caution with this is the longer you wait to have a look at your loophole.
The less options.
For instance,
to
if you wait till Sunday,
Yeah.
now you've got options from Adelaide, Fremantle, Melbourne, Richmond, GWS, and Hawthorn.
Yeah.
A Dangerfield's off the table, a
Cripps
Neil's off
is
the
gone.
table. So maybe that is something that if you pop a good game from a Tyler Brown on your bench and he gives you an 80 plus, you might just say,
I'll cop
you know
it for a
what,
week.
then
Yeah.
I can just ride out Fife because the damage isn't going to be as severe. Whereas conversely, if
You get a
Tyler
20
Brown
or
gets you a 30,
Yeah.
you're more inclined. So I would just encourage people, think about what your options are. And as we always say, just wait until the last minute that you physically can wait
Yep.
to pull off a trade. Because again, if Tyler Brown has a great game and he gets 100, well, all of a sudden, maybe
on
you
the
can
field.
hold a Fife and maybe you can move on a Houston to do something more
Yeah.
creative because you think, well, I can get rid of him. I would just encourage, use all those avenues you've got, set up your team in a way. The one that gets a lot of people is, for instance, if you're doing a Howe out,
Mm.
maybe you need to swing someone back.
Yeah.
You need to just make sure you're, just cover all those bases, especially when we got Thursday games, MJ. And I feel like Thursday's here to stay for the whole year. I know personally, there's all sorts of stuff's going on. You got the teams dropping, you got the teams confirmed for Thursday. Like, it can be really, really stressful. And I know, especially people listen to the coaches panel, you love all the formats. You're trying to get your draft team in order. Like, it is really hectic. So never a bad thing just to write out, what are the moves for this?
Yeah. What do I want
Just
to
say
do?
for my team, if I'm moving Howe to Dangerfield, okay, Branda's got to come to the back line. Houston's moving from the mid to the back line. You don't want to get caught having, just make sure everything's ticked off because it is a really, Thursday is just stressful. And I know this week, St Kilda Carlton, a lot of people don't have too many players from those teams. We know Doherty's
and Cripps
in most
in and
teams,
out.
Cripps. Yeah, even I feel like even your captaincy loopholes, MJ. You've got to get that right. Who's your non-playing player? Don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've seen people do a trade and they realize, oh, that person who I was going to be the loophole for
I've
my
just
vice
lost him.
captain,
Yeah.
I've had to trade them or I've had to move them. So again, planning it out. But I feel like it's a really interesting week for a lot of coaches. Again, if you got Nat Fife, you've pretty much got every option at your disposal.
That's right.
I think you just got to take in your team. That's the thing we always try to stress is
About you.
it's all about you. We try to give you obviously as much information as we can and use our teams as examples sometimes of why we do certain things. But I feel like this week in particular, I just don't love the premium defender options. Not saying I don't think they'll be good scorers, but when I see, like I mentioned with Lloyd versus a Dangerfield, if I've got Dangerfield cheaper and I'm very confident, I'm going to do everything I can in my trades
to get that,
to give me that option. And I just feel like it's a really good week for people to restructure that team. Maybe get that rookie. Maybe, as I said, maybe Starcevic has been stuck on your bench.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a week where you can pull him on to the field and get, a defender rookie like a Lewis Butler or maybe a Will Hamill. Obviously, we haven't seen those teams get named, but use it to your advantage. Take advantage of these weeks. And hey, if you're really confident in Jordan Ridley, absolutely back yourself in.
Yeah.
Because it's certainly got all the makings of a move that, hey, that can really put you ahead if he continues his run of form and you've saved 100 to 150K. You do that a couple of times, MJ, you're easily a premium upgrade ahead of most teams.
Yeah. No, I think it's a rip and move, and there's a lot for you to digest and process with now just a handful of hours left to go to lockout. But we hope that's going to help you, just some of those thoughts from Kane and I, as we've kind of helped you prepare for this upcoming round of footy. If you've got questions, always get in touch with us via social media. We'd love to be able to answer your questions. Patreons, thank you so much for your ongoing and continued support. But until next week, might have a few more members of the panel back for you as we get further into the 2020 fantasy footy season.